what I realized is sales is we all sell, but we don't even teach sales at business school. So where do you go to learn sales? How do we actually make sales less icky and more feel like you're serving and helping people? And so that's really what the book was trying to talk about, is it all turns out to have a relation back to progress and progression. And we have to actually take the view of the person we're trying to help in mind, as opposed to our product and figuring out how to push our product to people.
I discovered Bob's work when I was first learning about jobs to be done and the power of job stories. He just published a new book, which is amazing. We use job stories and habit stories as a foundational element in our game thinking techniques. Game thinking is all about taking your customer on a journey that they want to go on to become better at something they care about. And what's fascinating is that's really, in many ways, the same message that Bob has with selling, right, Bob?
Yep.
You talk a lot about demand side versus supply side thinking.
Yep.
Can you break that down for us?
I was taught around what I call the supply side of the world. And I, as a product person, discovered that I couldn't actually see the demand side of the world. The supply side of the world is this notion of like, I build a product and then I basically, from that product, they go like, who needs my product, right? And so, and who's using my product and who's, what they're doing with it is what I call the demand side. And there's this 10-foot thick wall that's 100-foot high between the two of us, right? And the way I was taught was that there's a business system where I got to create the business, but it all revolves around this notion of a product or a service. And that product has features and benefits and experiences and attributes, and out of it I create specs. But I literally go and say like, okay, I've got a company that builds mattresses. And then what happens is I look over that wall, right? And I try to see what's going on. But the thing is typically I got to climb up so high where it's 100 feet and I try to look over it. I end up seeing like segments and I see markets and personas and prospects and leads, but I see all these things, but I actually don't see what people really do. And so I end up distorting everything because I've got to see my product in every part of their life. And so I call this supply side thinking. We define the market through what I would say is like the product. So it's like, how many people need a mattress versus how many people can't sleep? And you start to realize it's a simple notion between the two, but the reality is like, not everybody who sleeps need a mattress. But at the same time, the fact is that people who can't sleep, they're actually going to buy a whole bunch of other things besides mattresses. And so you start to realize this notion of defining a market is way more complicated than you think. The other part is in Clay Christensen, who I was lucky enough to be friends with and mentored by for almost 30 years. He would always say that you've got to describe things in the N of one. So you've got to take the time to understand how one thing happens. And so to me, that's where I started to see the demand side. And so it all roots back to this notion of a struggling moment, that we as humans will do the same thing we did yesterday unless we struggle with it and want to do better. But if it works and it's okay, we actually don't even think about doing anything different. And we would prefer not to have to change something as opposed to change something. And so ultimately, without a struggling moment, we actually don't do anything. And so what happens is the demand side actually behaves completely differently than the supply side. That as a consumer, when I have a struggling moment, I'm in a very specific context of a struggling moment. And I either have a current product or I'm using something, or to be honest, I have time. But the combination of that context and the current product caused me to struggle. And that struggling moment then actually opens my brain up to basically say, I need something better. What are some new desired outcomes? And from that, I decide, well, what could I possibly do? And from that, I basically start to say, why I have some hire and fire criteria of how I choose, and I make some trade-offs. Well, ultimately, I still look over that wall and I look for a brand or a product or a company that can help me with my struggling moment. And so it's the same problem where we have to either drill a hole through that wall and look at very small way of looking over to the other side, or we have to climb up and we see 1,000 things. The first probably 5 years of my life, and the way I was taught as an engineer was basically to go build your product and they will come to buy it. And what I've learned to say is that the struggling moment and understanding where people want to do something better, the job to be done, it's not the job, It's the job to be done, which is about the future tense. If there's no struggling moment, I actually will not develop a product because there's nobody there to actually buy it. Whenever I innovate, I have to actually marry what I call the demand side with the supply side and understand the trade-offs I have to make on both sides of this to create and launch successful products.
Demand side is the customer and their context.
Yes.
Right? Pretty much.
Yep. Well,
and
it's
then,
not only their context, but it's their desired outcomes as well, because they've decided to change. If they don't struggle, they can't actually tell you what they want.
right. And then supply side is product creators and everything
Yep.
that is in their mind about creating a product.
So here's a perfect example of the disconnect. I have 4 children. They all play sports. Some play ice hockey, some play football, some play baseball. They play all these volleyball, you name it. And I'm a horrible photographer. I get more blurry photos than anything else, right? And so as the consumer in the dance, I struggle to say, like, I just want to take a picture of my kids. Now, what did I do? I look over the wall and I say, I want to take better pictures. And what do? I find Canon. Great camera company, right? And so they end up showing me a camera and I'm looking at all these features and I'm like, I don't even know if I need any of these features. I have to educate the crap out of myself to even figure out what half these things mean. What's an f-stop and what does shutter speed mean? And what does all this stuff mean? And then, oh, by the way, I'm thinking Canon. They're like, oh, let me show you against the Sony Alpha 7 II. Like, oh, wait, what? And then they do side-by-side comparisons to it, right? And then it's like, okay, I finally make a decision to buy the camera, but I have to learn so much about the camera. And then they say, oh, by the way, you can take the pictures, but you can't really do anything with them. You have to get Photoshop and then learn Photoshop from Adobe to figure out how to manipulate it. So now you can actually have really good pictures. And so it's this whole notion of like, and over the years, they have made better and better cameras and made them faster and faster and bigger shutter speed and bigger lenses and all that other stuff. And all I'm still trying to do is literally understand how to take a good picture of my kids. And so that wall in between the two is people think is like, if I build the camera, they will come. It's like, well, I don't have any other choices. But then comes who? Apple. Apple literally comes into the stage and basically says like, I don't need a good camera. I'm going to actually help you do it all. I'm going to actually show you one button to push and give you the software so you can become a great photographer. So as everybody went up market, they went down market and they actually made a better camera. And the craziest part is this, is that if you look at the number of pictures that have been taken just over the decades, right? We're at 1.2 trillion pictures a year annually. And if you look at actually all the analog pictures, they've literally gone down to 4 billion. And you look at camera sales and they've changed. And the question really is, how does this happen? Let's be clear, Canon, Hasselblad, Nikon, Olympus, these are all really smart companies. How do they end up not seeing the opportunity for something like the iPhone camera? And it's because they focus on competition and they focus on the product more than focusing on the customer. One of my first cell phones was a Motorola Razr. It was like the smallest picture you can imagine. It was the crappiest thing, but it was actually a better picture than no picture at all. How many people want to take a picture but can't? We call that non-consumption. And if you actually focus on the lower end of the market as opposed to the higher end of the market, it's way bigger than you think it is.
Bob is one of the VIP experts you can work with in our Game Thinking Academy, the online center for product leaders who want to get ahead. To hear more of Bob's thoughts on demand-side sales and jobs to be done, check out gamethinking.io/Bob and be sure to pick up your free Jobs to be Done cheat sheet while you're there.